Whoa, welcome back to the Real Estate Locker Room Show, folks. I'm your host, John Carney, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us on this podcast. I'm truly grateful for all you return listeners out there. You know that your support is what keeps the show going and what keeps me inspired. I know your time is super valuable, and especially today, and in the environment we're working in, but thank you for tuning in to the Real Estate Locker Room Show. And if this is your first time, welcome to the show. You know, we have a simple goal here, and that's to deliver you some actionable advice on how to elevate your real estate game today, to continue to raise the bar in whatever you're doing, whether you're a supporting person for the real estate industry or a seasoned pro, or you're just thinking about getting into real estate investing. You know, welcome to the show that believes real estate is a team sport. Today is episode number 89, and we've got Mr. Dave Foster joining us, and we are going to talk about something, 1031 exchanges. He's an expert. I am not, but you're going to hear this word thrown around a lot, especially if you're in America or investing in America. So this will be everything you need to know. So welcome, Dave, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. I don't know about you, but I got nothing else to do. We're under lockdown like the rest of the world.
We're all on lockdown. Today's April 2nd, 2020, and we're navigating challenging times.
You know that we are. I've got to tell you, you got to have some fun along the way. Just yesterday, we got a news release. The governor of Colorado had decreed that because of this emergency, all students were going to have to retake their current grade next year. And I think within about 30 minutes, they had shut down the internet in Colorado before he could announce that it was an April Fool's. What an awesome trick.
Oh, man. Are you out in Colorado?
I'm actually in Florida, where the governor has decreed that fishing is an essential sport. So we can be on lockdown and still go fishing. That's okay.
You know, there was something came out the other day on the news. It was on YouTube. Someone had used Governor DeWine here in Ohio and said that they were closing down all the liquor stores. And guess what everybody did?
Oh,
yeah. I called. I said, is it true? When are you guys closing? I said, we're not closing.
You know, these are uncertain times, though. You know, my heart goes out to everybody. But like everything, right, in real estate, you find a way to pivot.
Absolutely.
Take advantage and to keep going, because that's what you got to
do. Let's stretch out real quick. In the Real Estate Locker Room Show, I find that a lot of people have either played sports or have an athlete that they admire. We've also have some folks that don't play sports and have other types of professionals they admire. So is you know, growing up, were you a sports guy?
You know, I was. I played some college basketball, but I turned that into a volleyball career and ended up coaching college volleyball for 8 years.
Dude, that's awesome. So you know all about
a lot of fun. But I got to tell you, the sport that I'm most excited about right now is, I think I told you right before the show that we're trying to redo our kitchen during this lockdown. So we have started a new sport called competitive paint drying. We're going to put the paint on the wall and watch it dry because we got nothing else to do.
Yep, I gotcha. I mean, I hope you're far enough along that you if you're at the painting process, then there truly is hopefully a light at the end of the tunnel.
It's true.
Well, look, so when you were you know, as a player, as a collegiate player, that's high level. And then as a collegiate coach, that's also high level. Like, you know, what experiences from that past career do you bring into your real estate investing in your business of facilitating 1031 exchanges?
That's a great question. You know, what was interesting is that particularly in the middle of the coaching career, both my wife and I had fairly high profile careers going. And the pressure cooker of being in two worlds like that and trying to think about the future all came to this crashing head when our first son was born. And it was like, oh my gosh, everything changed. And it went from thoughts of success and championships and all the things that go along with that. And it became just wanting to just do nothing but stare at this little bundle He was better than a TV. And it was right at that point that we said, you know what, we got to find a way to get off the corporate train and create a life where we can truly enjoy our passion, which was sailing and our son. And we took the lessons that we had learned in becoming successful entrepreneurs and coaches and applied that to creating a plan. And the first thing is you have to have a destination, right? So our destination was get off the train. You don't ever become a national champion by trying to become second place in conference. You've got to have your sights set on where you're going to get, and then nothing else but that is acceptable. And then you've got to break it down into your pieces before that and say, okay, just because I want to be a national champion doesn't make it so. What are the common characteristics that every national champion has? And then what do they do to get there? So basically, it's a variation, if you will, off of what Stephen Covey once said in his book, The Habits of Highly Successful People. He said, you always begin with the end in mind. So you got a vision of what the end is going to be. You get common characteristics of people who've arrived at that same end. And then you start to back it out to actionable items that are going to make you like them. So that was what we did. We started to try to find the avenue that was going to let us get off the corporate train. And this was in the early 90s. Real estate was just starting its last drive up. And we said, well, gosh, real estate might be just the ticket. So I had some experience in that. And so, John, I went into Denver. You'll appreciate this, knowing Denver the way you do. I went into Denver and picked up a duplex for less than $100,000. And which I don't think you can find that animal anymore in Denver. But I fixed it up, renovated it completely, sold it, made a great profit. And I was so excited and happy until I went to my accountant that December. And he said, ooh, when an accountant starts with that word, that's a bad sign. I almost wept at how much effort I had put into that renovation and how much I was giving back in taxes to the government. And that's when I decided never again. And it was right at that point in time that we discovered a process called the 1031 exchange, which had just undergone some major revamp by the IRS to make it user-friendly. And some other good friends of mine, by the way, good friends always mock you. So as they were mocking me for spending all that money in taxes, they also let me in on a secret that they were going to start a business doing 1031s for others. Would I like to join them? And so I did, and that was over 20 years ago. And we've never looked back. And since that time, I've never paid a penny in capital gains tax on real estate transactions.
Before we break that down, thanks for sharing the story, because every successful business usually starts out trying to solve a problem that resulted from pain, right? It's the quintessential. And when we were chatting earlier about the 9 players I talk about in my book, and the accountant being the first person, I had a very similar experience in Australia when I had the best year of my life until I sat down with my accountant. And I want to say it was an unpleasant experience, and, lesson learned.
Yeah, there's no bigger killjoy than a CPA.
Depends on if you're educated or not. We were also talking about some people that you knew here in Ohio, right? And James Wise and I were talking about accountants, and he specifically said on the podcast, hey, I hope that your accountant charges you an awful lot of money. and you know what? We've got a good person on the team, different subject, different podcast, but you roll right into that. So, drum roll, please, for everybody out there. This is an important item. So, crank up the volume and listen to the definition of what a 1031 exchange is and why you need an education about it.
Right. So what I'm going to be then is the 10th member of your team.
Absolutely.
Because I'm a qualified intermediary for 1031 exchanges. There is in the statute of the IRS tax code a provision that allows you to sell investment real estate, and by using a specific process, which includes using a qualified intermediary, you purchase new investment real estate. And by doing it the right way, you get to defer indefinitely paying the tax on the capital gain and any depreciation recapture that you might have as well. And when I say indefinitely, one thing I loved about your bio, John, was that you specifically emphasized that you're a third generation investor. And I have investors in their third generations right now who, like you, have taken advantage of these things. And it did not just defer the tax through their lifetime, but through their children's lifetime and through their children's children's lifetime. And when you start to think about how that can add up, if you've got a $100,000 profit anywhere in the United States between state and federal tax, you're probably going to pay $20,000 in tax. What if that $20,000 was allowed to stay in your pocket to be used to buy new real estate to make money for you? And each time that happened, that 20,000 plus the new 20,000 plus the next 20,000 stay in your pocket. By the end of your life, you are generating income for you that is incredibly been built on tax revenue that you just haven't had to pay legally. And that's what the 1031 exchange does in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. You know, so when we talk about buy and hold, there's some people take it too, and when you get into generational real estate, buy, hold until death, right? And you know, that's part of a pretty comprehensive legacy wealth type thing. But if you're if we're breaking this down for investors that are out there that might be first generation folks that have heard about the 1031 exchange but don't understand it, you know, what is, I mean, you explained it, but it's a tax deferment. But specifically, can you address, you hear you have to exchange like real estate for like real estate. What does that mean?
Right. Okay. Well, like real estate really specifically refers to the use of it. And the 1031 exchange can be used for any kind of property as long as it's being held for investment. So one of the key strategies could be buying a piece of property and like a single family rental. That's a great way to cut your teeth. But sooner or later, you're wanting to move into multifamily or into commercial or industrial, or go the opposite direction. Or you've got one property and you want to purchase more than one. The 1031 exchange can be used in all of those applications. So it doesn't limit you to the buy and hold, as in you have to buy it and never sell it. Anytime you sell that investment property, you can use the 1031 exchange to go and purchase any other kind of real estate as long as it's going to be used for investment, and you'll never have to pay the tax. So kind of the quintessential picture of an investor, there's people I like to call the accidental investor. And these are people who get married later in life because that's what we're starting to do. And by the time they get married, they've each got a house, right? That they've been living in. They move into one of the houses. What do they do with the other one? They put a renter in it. By the way, John, do you know which house they always move into?
No.
The wife's. It's the only one that's clean.
Yeah, I got you. That makes sense.
But they just became accidental investors. So down the road, a year or two later, they think, wow, this has been really good. What if we sold this property and went and bought two properties? Or maybe it's time to go buy a vacation rental and get something on a beach somewhere that we can use some and we can rent out some. All of that is the kind of moves that you can make with the 1031 exchange. And while you're doing it, you're never having to pay the tax.
So let me just ask a couple more questions. And so are there limitations on the time? Right. I've never done a 1031 exchange, but I've heard lots of stories. So I'm trying to dispel the myths that are running
The
around.
stories, yes, yes, yes. Yeah,
Dusting off, like I was driving into the office today thinking like 1031 exchange, whatever, this is going to be great. This is going to be a great conversation we're having. So timeline, time pressure.
right. Yeah,
And
so I'm sorry, didn't mean to jump on you there.
no, go. Please.
So remember the thing at the very beginning, we said you have to use a QI. So the qualified intermediary is kind of like your guide through the maze, right? And you can generally distill down that there's going to be 6 requirements that all have to be met. The first one we just talked about, what kind of real estate qualifies? If you're living in the property, it doesn't qualify for 1031. And there are some very specific timing requirements. You're absolutely right. And because the result of all this is from a major 20-year tax court case that the IRS lost. Can you imagine how happy they were that they went 20 years and lost? So they had to let 1031s happen, but they sure didn't have to make them easy. And so everything that they did not like about what was happening in the court case, which was Starker versus the commissioner, became enshrined in the new tax code regulations. So timing wise, from the day that you close your sale, you only have 45 days to shop around. You've got to have your list of potential replacements in place by day 45. So it's one of those things where you've got to be focused on shopping very quickly. And let's go back to those 9 people, John. You got to have a realtor or maybe 9 or 10 that are way on top of the game for you so that you can find the right deals. Now, a 1031 has a total timeline of 180 days, but it's those 45 days that become really critical to finding your next property. So those are the timing requirements. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so what I'm hearing in my brain is that if you're going to do this and you're selling an asset, you've got to do some work prior to selling that asset, probably even prior to listing that asset, by identifying an area that would be helpful to identify an area and an asset class you'd be interested in. You should identify the right real estate professionals in that market, in that asset class, that would have the listings, and assemble your team or plug your team that you have existing right into it. So if you're looking, I suppose, ahead of time, that the sales cycle is going to take this amount of time, you'll be ready to jump.
Right. And there is nothing that prohibits you from going into contract on your new property before your old property closes. But the order of the 1031 exchange is that you have to close the sale before you can close the purchase.
Right.
And so as long as you keep that order in place, then you're going to be good. It's really interesting that you talk about location and markets, because that's another strategic opportunity within the 1031 exchange. Early on in a market, usually, we start to see appreciation being the key. That's the driver. So markets that typically the West Coast, the New Yorks, the highly favorable vacation spots are all going to recover in a market and appreciate much more quickly than anything else. And appreciation is an amazingly awesome thing. But at some point in time, and if you talked to all of our California investors these days, you'd be hearing the same thing. My properties have appreciated greatly, but I can't generate enough income at all to justify the high ticket. Because what's a good rental return on a $100,000 property is not nearly so good when that property is worth $500,000. So researching your markets to find the ones that are going to suit you best. Is there a market that's just starting to pop? Is there a market where you could take your appreciation property and go buy things that are more cash flow productive? I know that, you've got pretty substantial interest in Cleveland. Cleveland is not generally in a late market, the highest appreciation kind of market. But Cleveland's been pretty awesome for cash flow, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting things happen. We're in the multifamily business, and the rent drivers here are, for income, the income earned and the rent paid, that sort of ratio is right up there with any of your big city markets in the United States. We've got some neighborhoods here that are really popping. And, the challenge in this market is where are the people coming from? That's up to the city and the entrepreneurs that arrive here. And we could really pull on a string and go on forever. There's some infrastructure due to, the initial use of the city industry and where they decided to put the airport, right? A long time ago, that made sense. That's an infrastructure issue that's kind of a growth inhibitor for certain industries, but not all. When you look at the cost of living and you want to get a lot of bang for your buck to raise your family in the suburbs and drive downtown, and you can see all the major sports and all the major entertainers come through town, right? I mean, it's a stop. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's here. So if you like live music or you like theater or you like sports, you get to see it all. And it's a relatively inexpensive place to live. But, there are other markets that I've traded in: Arizona, Colorado, Atlanta, and everything's different. So the 1031 exchange, that works coast to coast all around the United States.
Absolutely. It's a federal statute. So it is practiced the same in all 50 states. And if you're interested, Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands and the Northern Marianas Islands. I'm not even sure where that's at, but I know
Sounds
you can 1031 into it.
I'm interested.
But yeah, as of right now, there is only one state that does not let you recognize it at the state level, and that's Pennsylvania. But even there, you can still do the 1031s and defer the federal tax. So yeah, you can move into any other kind of property anywhere you want in the country. And that's a pretty powerful freedom to be able to have and still avoid tax.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your services. So, anyone who's been tuning into this show for 3 or 4 episodes has probably heard me say, if you're not an expert, find an expert, hire the expert. I didn't always think that way. There was a time when I was much younger and I thought I could do everything myself. And that's not how I think 20 years later. So you're an expert, clearly. Talk about the service you provide to your clients so that everyone can understand not only what value you add to their real estate team, but why it's important to not make. I'm sure you see 1 or 2 mistakes commonly made. Let's talk about those as well.
Right. Well, let me circle back and just briefly mention real quick the last 2 of the 6 requirements, because that's going to feed into what we do. So you have to use a QI as well. And in addition to that, there are some pretty strict titling requirements. Who actually has to be on the deed, or who the taxpayer has to be between the new property and the old property. And that by itself is a maze that requires you to go through some tax returns to be able to identify so that you can keep that consistent. So that's one big issue that's kind of not DIY. The last one is the reinvestment requirements. If you don't want to pay any tax, you have to purchase at least as much as you sell. And there's a lot of confusion over that. What kind of costs count? What does that really mean in terms of reinvestment? Can I go from 1 to multiples? All those kinds of things are questions. The QI is required by statute. John, I have a job because of the IRS. I should be thanking them. I don't. Usually they're a 4-letter word to me. But we only exist as an industry because the IRS requires you to use an independent third party who's going to document the exchange and is going to ensure the transfer of the proceeds. Because there's two really critical things that a client has to keep in mind. Number one is that the QI has to be in place prior to the sell. And that's one of the frequent mistakes. I get one or two calls every month. And they'll say, Dave, I sold a property last week and I want to do a 1031 exchange. And I have to tell them, well, that's really awesome, but you're not going to do it on this one because the QI was not in place and you closed your sale, which means two things. First of all, the 1031 wasn't documented on the settlement statements. And secondly, you touched the money. And as soon as you touch the money, you can't do a 1031. So that's probably the single biggest mistake that people will make. And that's why the QI is there to guide you through all of that kind of thing. The 45-day requirement is another one. That's probably where I see the most exchanges fail because there's some specific requirements that we probably don't even have time to go into today with how you identify your properties. And this is the sneaky little IRS thing. They don't tell you that there's a limit on how many properties you buy, but there are limits on how many properties you can identify as potential replacement properties. So someone could just say, well, I sold one, I'm going to go buy 10 properties. Well, there's some things you've got to be aware of if you want to do that, because you may not be able to. And that's what the QI has to be there to steer you through. So most qualified intermediaries end up being these nerd-like guys like me, where we go what is called 2 miles deep in a 2-foot wide creek. I don't know much. All I know is 1031. And that's all we do.
That's interesting because that those are things that I have not even heard about. I think I've heard that the, people who have had maybe not so great an experience and ended up with an asset that they had to really reposition and caused them all kinds of problems. It was kind of a last minute thing. They knew they wanted to do a 1031 exchange, but they wanted to do everything on their own, including sourcing the asset, or there wasn't enough inventory, whatever the reason is. And so they ended up with something and it wasn't awesome. And so then, they soured, their experience was soured, right? So then that type of noise investors with the bad experience using this awesome, tool you might hear their story and be turned off by it. So what I've got from you, Dave, is that proper planning and a right QI, and hey, you just keep this machine pumping them out.
Well, let's talk about that exact example. One of the things that your QI needs to be is that calm voice of reason that's telling you it's going to be okay. The timing is serious. You're coming up on it. But hey, there is no penalty for starting a 1031 exchange and not finishing it. And we've helped clients kind of emotionally choke on that because they say, well, I paid my money to start the exchange. I've got to finish it. And I just help them. I say, well, take a look at what you've got for available inventory. Take a look at what it costs you to start an exchange. And by the way, a typical exchange it's going to be $750 to $1,000, no matter where you are. So they're not the kind of thing that breaks your bank where you can't let go of it. But when we talk about it, I say, well, what are you going to make if you buy that property? What's going to be your NOI? Well, why don't you just give up the $750 and let it die? Because that's probably the wiser choice. The clients sometimes just can't get emotionally able to let go. And as the QI, I'm sitting back here with the big picture in mind for them, helping them kind of see that. Yeah, that's the role that we play. We hold hands a lot.
Well, back on that. So if you can't find the right product, you end up having to pay the tax, correct?
That's exactly right. But which you would have anyways.
Sure.
But no penalties, no interest. The way the statute is structured, your exchange will always be done before you have to file your next tax return. So if you let it die, You just file your tax return as if it never happened.
I got you. What would be some tips for, a couple tips related specifically to 1031 exchange, for people to really consider, before having a serious crack at it?
Well, way back at the beginning of our chat, you used the D word. So I'm going to circle back on that. It was death, right? The idea of dying as estate planning. In this industry, there's a mantra that's out there that says the key to success as a 1031 investor is to defer, 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 and then die. Because when you die, your heirs get what is called a step up in basis. So they inherit your property as if they paid market value for it. In other words, John, the tax disappears when you die and they get to start over. And that's the legacy that you can leave to your children. So in terms of a strategy, you always want to have a longer term frame of mind than a shorter term, because compound interest, which is really what this is, right? You're using deferred dollars to make money, just like in a 401k. And then that compounds on itself. Compound interest always is more powerful the longer the time period. So every extra day that you can keep the tax dollars in your pocket is an extra day you get the money and the compounding of that money. So that's the first thing that I would say, is use a longer term frame of mind. The other thing that it does for you is it lets things like appreciation and debt service pay down work more into your scenarios. It's not just about the rental income. You can really bring in that calculation of the internal rate of return, which is the sum of all of the sources of income. And when you own rental property, it's not just about the rents. It's about how much of the mortgage the tenant is paying. And it's about how much that property is appreciating. And it's about what the tax benefits you're getting are. So in everything with the 1031, longer frame of mind rather than a shorter. And then the other, I think, great key is exactly what you said. Start early and be strategic. Because sometimes there's a thing that we got out of the last recession called the strategic default, right? Where I knew this property was going to go under. I strategically let it go. And it hurt me, right? But by doing that, we position the rest of our portfolio better. Strategic defaults of a 1031 don't hurt you. But as long as you're thinking ahead, what does hurt you is when you try to do a ready, fire, aim without proper thought. I would say those two things are the...
So ready, fire, aim.
Exactly.
Does not
Instead
work.
Of ready, aim, fire.
Does not work with 1031 exchange. Great way
Exactly.
to put a new product out the door and test the market. Not a great way to or a new marketing idea or something like that. 1031 exchange. Find yourself an expert like Dave. Get the education and just plan. I mean, my goodness, I'm sure that you have a framework where you onboard your new clients and say, start here, finish here, and rinse and repeat, as I say.
It's a lot of education. It really is. In 2005, that was the last year that the number of 1031 exchanges peaked. And there are almost 500,000 done that year. But what happened in between then and now? The great crash, right? During that period of time, there were two really significant occurrences. The first one was 70% of the realtors who knew 1031 exchanges went out of business. The second thing was all of the 1031 investors went bankrupt. So as we came into this new market, all of the historical knowledge and the people who knew how to use these things was gone. It was all new realtors. And the investors now were 15 when the market crashed. So they don't know. So really a lot of my time is spent exactly that, doing education, so that I can be a good guide for people who want to do their 1031s.
That's awesome, Dave. Well, look, and what a great service, and you explained it well, and hopefully, members of our audience will pursue this and contact you. So before we wrap this up, a couple of final questions I'd love to ask. Is there a book you've read recently, related to either being an entrepreneur like yourself or a real estate investor, that you'd like to share with the audience, or a favorite?
I tell you what, there's two books and I read them about every other year over and over again. But I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them. They're by a man by the name of Richard Marbury. And the first one is called Whatever Happened to Penny Candy. And it is one of the best street level treatises on the power of government intervention and inflation you'll ever read. But it's written at about a 7th or 8th grade level, so I can understand it.
Yeah.
And the second one and it's all by the same man, was called The Clipper Ship Strategy. And that is about how to find the next investment or the next investment sector. One of the things that I didn't know until I read that book was that the entire era of the clipper ships in America was only about 18 months. And they were running the trade, Australia, America, and from the East Coast to the West Coast. But they were only profitable for about 18 months. And there were some specific macro things that happened to cause that unbelievable wealth and to shut it off. And so he takes you through that strategy. Those are just two awesome books that I love, and I read them periodically.
That's awesome. I look forward to putting them on the stack. You'd think that I'd be getting through my stack of books during the shutdown, but someone put Tiger King out on Netflix.
Oh, I know.
I've only got 3 more hours of my life to dedicate to it, and then I hope it goes away. But we're hooked. We're right in the middle of it.
Well, that's right next door to us. We're actually in Pinellas County. So we're right next door to where it happened. So
unbelievable. All right. Is it one other question I love to ask our guests? Is it you're a successful person. You had a career as a college athlete. That takes a lot of discipline to get there, and then you turned around and became a college coach. I have to imagine that you have some advice that we can all take on board as to how is there something that you do, a habit or a daily routine you believe is a factor in your success?
Yeah, I think probably the single biggest thing that has allowed me to end up where I'm at today and to be able to have that bucket list of experiences and skills that I've developed over time is kind of twofold off the same thought. Number one, follow your passion and follow it now. Don't let things wait till tomorrow if you can start working on them today. If you know that you want to be whatever it is. For us, we wanted to take off on a sailboat in 10 years. If that's your goal, then start your planning for that now, because that's part of living it. And if you do it now, then you won't be surprised when goal date comes and you've met it, because you did the things necessary to do it. So follow your passion. Don't let it be something where one day I want to do that. Do it now, because you don't know what tomorrow brings. And tomorrow's never going to come unless you plan for it today. And along with that, one of the biggest pieces of advice I ever heard was from another podcast guest who said he was an entrepreneur, not in the real estate industry. But he said, folks, I want to tell you, only do what your passion is and don't do anything else. Because if you don't do only what your passion is, you're going to suck and you're going to get burned out. Because if you are a finance guy and you started a company and you're having to do accounting or marketing, you're not going to do it well. You're going to suck. and you're going to get burned out. And sooner or later, you're not going to do the finance side of it well. So find that passion of what you want to do and do it. And then, in honor of you and your book, go find those other 9 people to do what isn't your passion. And that's why it's a team. And that's what made me a successful coach as well.
Thanks for sharing that, Dave. I mean, that is awesome advice and a good, you know what, it's just relevant to where we are now. I bet a lot of people are thinking about things super hard right now. And do you remember the good old days, like February? I mean,
when I was with the spring break crowd.
So bad, sometimes you can only laugh, folks. It's not, but I mean, this is a game changer. These times are a game changer. And, think about exactly what Dave said. Where do you want to be in 10 years? Are you happy doing what you're doing now? Thanks a lot for joining us today in the locker room, Dave. Where can the audience find you, to get more involved with their ongoing 1031 exchange or do their first?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that a lot of my role, I feel, is that of an educator and walking with people through the process. So to that end, we've established a whole education portal at the1031investor.com. And there's videos, calculators, articles, ways to contact me. It's an awesome source of information, particularly since you don't have anything else to do anyways. So jump to the1031investor.com. And if you'd let me, I'd love to give your viewers a gift today. And if they'll just go to the1031investor.com/podcast, we'd love to give them $50 off their first exchange if they use the online portal.
Super generous of you, Dave, and much appreciated. And there you have it, folks. I mean, I truly hope that you picked up some actionable advice today regarding 1031 exchanges. And if you have more questions, hook up with Dave Foster and his business. And make sure to check out the Real Estate Locker Room Show on iTunes. We're on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, all of those places. And the mission here is to help you elevate your real estate game. And I believe we accomplished that today with your advice, Dave. If you like what this show is all about, I'd be super stoked if you would leave us a review on iTunes or your preferred podcasting platform so that other real estate investors just like you are able to find us when they're looking for some content online to listen to or watch. The post-game show notes, links, and additional content relative to our conversation with Mr. Dave Foster and 1031 Exchange will be available on my website, johncarneyonline.com/podcast. This is episode number 89. Remember to stay focused on your goals, everybody. Have fun. Stay in the game. I'm your host, John Carney, and until next week, let's continue to work hard, play hard, and raise the bar. Thanks again, Dave, for taking the time out of your lockdown to share this awesome information with us.
Back to the paint drying.